Hi everyone, and a warm welcome to For the Love of Comics, where we continue our tour of our complete comics collection. These bookshelf tours are one video per shelf, and we've done 10 videos on 10 shelves so far that you can find in this playlist linked above. To that, today we're adding shelf 11, although I feel a little guilty about calling this shelf 11 because only half of this is populated by comics. That's because my wife has taken forcibly the top 2 rows of this bookshelf. So this contains, among others, her illustrated copies of the Lord of the Rings and the Harry Potter books out so far, which she claims matches perfectly with the rest of the comics around this living room. So only 2 out of 4 shelves actually have comics on them. However, that limited space does allow for this shelf to achieve a publisher focus that no other shelf does. Apart from 2 or 3 DC books and 2 or 3 IDW books, this is almost exclusively a Dark Horse Comics bookshelf. We've obviously seen other Dark Horse comics on the other shelves before, but there is a unique identity that this shelf achieves because of the representative Dark Horse creators and stories that we have over here. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at shelf 11, our Dark Horse hardcover shelf. The comics finally begin on the 3rd shelf with The Finder Library Volume 1 from Dark Horse Comics by Carla Speed McNeil. We looked at Volume 4 of Finder, Talisman, on shelf 7. It was a hardcover single volume that I'd picked up at a used bookstore and was my introduction to this series. I read it out of order, but I thought it was a completely fine standalone read and very intriguing. Finding all of the volumes of this series so far is a little difficult, so it was recommended that this was the way to go, and I really enjoyed this volume. This is gentle science fiction, although it's unmistakably science fiction, and it's a very unique approach that encompasses storytelling and history and cultural observations, along with some very interesting character work in telling a very unusual story. I found Finder to be a great series, and I'm looking forward to continuing with the Finder library with Volume 2, and I think Volume 3, if I'm not mistaken, is scheduled to release this year as well. These over here are the limited edition hardcovers and trade paperbacks of Usagi Yojimbo, the usual collections that collect about 4 or 5 issues. I talk about both these hardcovers as well as these paperbacks in a separate video that you can find linked in the top right corner of your screen. So check that out for a closer look at how Usagi Yojimbo is regularly collected, as well as the limited edition signed and sketched with color plate hardcover editions. So that's Traitors of the Earth, Fathers and Sons, Fox Hunt, and Volume 27, A Town Called Hell, which I mentioned in my How to Start Reading Usagi Yojimbo video as a great place to start the series in spite of it being Volume 27. These are 2 volumes of Dark Horse anthologies, the Dark Horse Book of Hauntings and the Dark Horse Book of the Dead. There is a 3rd volume, now that I think about it, the Dark Horse Book of Witches, which I knew I was supposed to get but never got around to getting, so I seem to have rediscovered a hole in my collection. I really enjoy these Dark Horse anthologies. They contain work from some of my favorites, like the Book of the Dead contains a Hellboy adventure from Mike Mignola. There's a Robert E. Howard story adapted by Gary Gianni, a story by Bob Fingerman, a story by Eric Powell of The Goon, and in particular, the last story over here, Let Sleeping Dogs Lie, a Beasts of Burden story by Evan Dawkin and Jill Thompson. I love Beasts of Burden. I mentioned it briefly when we were looking at Animal Rights, the volume on shelf 7, and the Dark Horse Book of Hauntings is similarly star-studded with stories by Mike Richardson and P. Craig Russell, another Hellboy adventure from Mike Mignola, and another Beasts of Burden story by Evan Dawkin and Jill Thompson. If I'm not wrong, this story, Stray, is the very first Beasts of Burden story, but I could be wrong about that. Another Dark Horse hardcover, Loverboys by Gilbert Hernandez. This is a standalone work unrelated to the Love and Rockets universe. I've seen more than one person compare this book to a film by Pedro Almodovar, and I can completely see that, although it does have its own Hernandez sort of flavor as well. This is the Age of Reptiles omnibus, which collects the 3 Age of Reptiles series that had been published till then in one volume. If you're not familiar with Age of Reptiles, it's a magnificent dinosaur series by Ricardo Delgado, absolutely wordless, bereft of language of any kind, actually. No caption boxes or narration at all. It's just dinosaurs, and dinosaurs eating other dinosaurs and attacking other dinosaurs. It's quite difficult to describe how exciting this comic is. It creates a palpable sense of danger and, in the later stories, of absolute shock and awe. And I consider this some of the purest and most effective comic storytelling I've read. So this volume contains Age of Reptiles, Age of Reptiles The Hunt, and Age of Reptiles The Journey, 3 mini-series of 4 issues each. There's at least one more series after these 3 have been published, Ancient Egyptians. There might be another one after that as well. These 2 hardcovers over here are by twin brothers Gabriel and Fabio Moon of Day Tripper and Two Brothers fame. Pishu, I think is how it's pronounced. The Mark of Evil is a horror story which has and Moon collaborating with Becky Cloonan and Vasiles Lolos. And Details is a collection of semi-autobiographical stories set in Brazil by and Moon. We saw 47 Ronin in one of my recent reads, new acquisitions videos. I've read this now. I really loved Stan Sakai's art in this classic samurai story. It was interesting, as I noted before, to see him working with human figures instead of the anthropomorphic animals of Usagi Yojimbo. I thought Stan Sakai did a marvelous job telling this classic story. Superb artwork and very good writing from Mike Richardson. These are 3 volumes of Bandette by the husband and wife team of Paul Tobin and Colleen Coover. A very charming, beautifully drawn, sort of 1960s, 1970s Blake Edwards type of crime caper stories about Bandette, who's an art thief. Volume 1, Presto. Volume 2, Stealers, Keepers. And Volume 3, The House of the Green Mask, all equally charming. If you're a fan of those Audrey Hepburn, Cary Grant movies set in Europe in the high glamour world with crime being just another kind of adventure, these should be right up your alley. Not from Dark Horse, but IDW. Here are 3 volumes that I think group together similarly, like the Dark Horse Book of Hauntings and the horror. You have the Little Book of Horror Frankenstein, the Little Book of Horror War of the Worlds, and the Little Book of Horror Dracula. All of them written by Steve Niles. Frankenstein has Scott Morse on the art. Scott Morse, whose Barefoot Serpent biography of Kurosawa I talked about in one of my shelf videos. War of the Worlds is illustrated by Ted McKeever, whose work I'm actually not that familiar with, but quite enjoyed in this book. And of course, Dracula, the reason why I discovered this series in the first place, as it has on art duties Richard Sala, one of my all-time favorites. Richard Sala's art and style just transforms this classic tale. I'm not keeping an official count or tally, but I think Richard Sala is by far the artist who shows up on the most number of my shelves. He's spread all over because I think he works in all kinds of formats. And then 5 volumes of Concrete by Paul Chadwick. So I have volumes 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7. I actually do have volumes 1 and 5. I have purchased them, but they are waiting to be picked up in the US somehow, someday. I will get to them. Meanwhile, I find that these volumes are completely readable standalone. I did start with volume 2, move on to 3, etc. I haven't read 6 and 7 because I read 2, 3, and 4, but I really want to read 5 before I go into 6 and 7. I was okay with missing volume 1 before starting, but now that I know that I actually own it and it's there waiting for me to get my hands on it somehow, I'm willing to wait before I continue with volume 6, Strange Armor, and volume 7, The Human Dilemma. If you're not familiar, I will say that Concrete is one of the smartest and most heartfelt and most intelligent independent American comics that I've read. And then finally over here, we have a collection of Indian comics that actually belong to my wife. These are the anthologies Tinkle, as well as the folklore and mythology and history-based comics that this publisher is most famous for. These are the later reprints from my wife's generation. She's a few years younger than I am. And these over here are the originals bound from my childhood, the exact copies that I used to read a very, very long time ago of similar comics. There are a number of these volumes right outside the frame, but I'm not going to take a detailed look because I plan on doing an in-depth video on them at some point of time when my skills have caught up with my ambition. All right, I'm going to try to speed through this bottom shelf because I've got the camera slightly precariously perched and I'm not quite sure if it's going to take it. So right over here we have the Silver Age Omnibus, Volume 1 of the Legion of Superheroes. I'm not a huge Silver Age comics fan. I find a lot of the Golden Age and even the Silver Age a little dated, and so not all stories from that time really work for me as an adult today. The Legion of Superheroes happens to be one of those exceptions. I've always been a fan of the Legion of Superheroes, and the Silver Age stories of this group are just somehow very charming, very optimistic. The approach they have towards the powers and the responsibilities, etc., just hit the right notes for me and don't come across as cheesy, unlike a lot of the stuff from the same time. And although I'm not a huge fan of omnibuses, this is one that I really wanted to get, just to enjoy these stories in this restored, remastered sort of format. In fact, most of these books go against my statement that I'm not a big fan of omnibuses. Here are Jack Kirby's Fourth World Omnibus Volumes 4 and 3. These are the old printings. I only have 3 and 4. I know that the whole thing has been brought out in one massive omnibus, but I'm honestly not interested in anything that size. I love Jack Kirby. I love the worlds that he conjures up. And with the Fourth World stories, he did something really interesting. I love these hardcovers. They're light. They're easy to read, they're not too cumbersome, and I really wish I could pick up volumes 1 and 2 in this hardcover, but they're long out of print and very difficult to get. I started reading Conan comics last year, and in the middle of all of that, I picked up this Savage Sword of Conan Volume 22 for very, very cheap online just to read some Conan stories, and I enjoyed it, but not as much as I enjoyed sort of Conan reboot stories by Kurt Busiek, collected in the Dark Horse Omnibus Volumes 1 and 2. I did mention in one of my other videos that the Kurt Busiek Carrie Nord Conan was something I was really enjoying, but I also enjoyed Greg Root's Born on the Battlefield stories that are part of this first volume, and both Volume 1 and Volume 2 were excellent. Of course, they would go out of print just as I'm getting into them, so Volume 3 has been very hard to find. The prices have suddenly skyrocketed, but I have gotten my hands on Volume 4. This is Timothy Truman's writing, not Busiek anymore. I haven't yet gotten to this. I'll see if I can find Volume 3, otherwise I'll just skip along and move on to Volume 4. Then we have the Dark Horse Serenity hardcovers. I picked these up all together in one go from a friend selling them on Facebook. So there's Those Left Behind, Better Days, The Shepherd's Tale, and Leaves on the Wind. I'm usually not a big fan of tie-in comics or things that strike me as merchandise of movies and TV shows, but they've been getting better over the years, and I'm a big fan of the TV show Firefly. So Avatar: The Last Airbender and Firefly Serenity are the two that I've made an exception for, where I wanted to continue the story even though it was moving from television onto comics. Actually, that's not true. I mean, now that I think about it, Buffy the Vampire Slayer with Season 8 is the same way. Then we have some Tarzan comics. These are the Dark Horse Archives of Tarzan, the Joe Kubert years. This is Volume 2. That's Volume 1. And that's Volume 3, all picked up off eBay. We've actually seen the Goon Chinatown way back on shelf 1. It's moved over here to keep other Dark Horse books company. We saw these two Conan volumes in one of my new arrivals videos. That's the Jewels of Gwalior with P. Craig Russell and Shadows over Kush. Also covered in the same new arrivals video, I think, is Graffiti's Wall by Ram V, Anand RK and Aditya Bidikar, which I have now finished and really enjoyed. I thought this was a very interesting book and a step in a different direction for Indian comics, although it does have a very international flavor. But because it's set in India and because it's by Indian artists, I'm going to classify this as an Indian comic, even though I think you could make a case for it being out of the UK. We also saw Anthony Bourdain's Hungry Ghosts in that same new arrivals video. I guess I just pushed them all here together, as well as The Amazing Screw on Head, which has moved from shelf 1 again to join his Dark Horse brethren, and the Usagi Yojimbo Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover hardcover. And the last book over here is the latest arrival, Jules Pfeiffer's Kill My Mother, which I just got this month and showed in my last acquisitions video. There is a sequel to this book, or I think it's a prequel, Cousin Joseph, which I've ordered and which has just arrived, which will be joining Kill My Mother over here once I've finished reading it. The thing I like most about this shelf is that it's a really good mixture of my comics collecting aspirations as well as achievements. There are things that I have completed and there are sets over here, as well as things that I'm never going to be comprehensive about, but I'm going to enjoy the journey in collecting and reading. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, leave me comments below if you'd like a closer look at any of these, or with any questions, comments, or suggestions you may have. This has been For the Love of Comics. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the next video.